This here is a neuron. A neuron is a nerve cell, which is the basic building block of the nervous system. There are two kinds of neurons, sensory and motor. Sensory neurons carry incoming information or messages from sensory receptors to the brain and spinal cord. The motor neurons carry outgoing information or messages from the brain and spinal cord to the muscles and glands. Both types of neurons have dendrites, which are shown here. Dendrites are bushy extensions from the neuron and receive messages and conduct impulses toward the cell body. The cell body is shown here. The somona or cell body is the cell's life support center and contains the cell's main organelles like the nucleus. Connected to the cell body is the axon hillock, which decides when to send decides when to send a signal given all the information it already received, and it sends signals to the axons. The axons are represented by the bottom of the shoes. The axons are extensions of the neuron that end in the branching terminal fibers, which messages pass through and can be passed along to the other neurons and muscles, or to glands. The axons also hold negative ions, represented by the pink golf balls. Above the negative ions are the myelin sheath, which is represented by the top of the shoes. The covering of the axon is the fatty tissues, or the myelin sheath. This allows for greater transmission between the neural impulses as it bounces from one node to the next. Between each axon and myelin sheath, there is a node of Ranvier, or a gap. Between the fatty tissue, this is the only place where ion flow across the membrane occurs. At the other end of the neuron, or the terminal branches, or the synaptic branches, where they form junctions with other cells. These slender nerve fibers conduct electrical signals to nerve synapse. This signal that then can move from the synapse to another axon by neurotransmitters, which are represented by these pennies. A neurotransmitter is a chemical substance that is released at the end of a nerve fiber when a neural impulse is received. By diffusing across the synapse, here, there'd be another cell over here, and this is the synapse. It sends the impulse to the next neuron. This neuron here is in a phase which is called the resting potential. You can tell it is in resting potential by the positive ions and the negative ions. It is considered resting potential because the ions are not communicating between each other, or in other words, positive ions are content where they are right now. The ions are separated due to the selectively permeable membrane of the nerve cell. However, during polarization, a set of axon gates will open, letting positive sodium ions in. The current formed by depolarization creates an explosion of electrical activity, which is called action potential. When a neuron reaches its threshold, which is the level of stimulation required to trigger a neural impulse, a neuron will fire an action potential. The action potential is started here by the axon hillock and will travel down through the axons into the terminal branches. The impulse continues through the axon and through the terminal branches and into the neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters send an impulse to another neuron where they receive the impulse by the receptors on the dendrites. This will continue the message. The neurotransmitters bind with the receptors and either excite or inhibit a new action potential. Excitatory signals increase the possibility of firing action potential. Inhibitory signals decrease the possibility of firing action potential. After neurotransmitters binded and send their impulse, a process called reuptake occurs, which means that neurotransmitters are reabsorbed by sending the neuron.